Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwynne. This is where we talk about data, philosophy, and marketing. This week, the trouble with targeting. Now, I'm going to say targeting in this video. You could say segmentation. It's all good. What's the problem? So you've got a large group of customers and you want to start on your path towards personalization and one-to-one interactions with people. And for most companies, a good starting point, a solid starting point is segmentation and targeting. But it comes with a big question, which is what do I target on? What do I separate my groups out on? And so I thought I'd go through the problems that I see in a lot of companies today. So the first is targeting on something that's very simple, which is demographics. Now, every company probably has demographic information on the gender split, the age split, maybe the geography split of their customers. It's something that most people have access to. And it's a very useful metric. Let's not go down the wrong path and say it's not useful at all. It's very useful because it can be appended to your paid ads, your online advertising, your online marketing, and also your offline marketing. You can see that the sun has a certain demographic, and if your demographic matches that, it's more likely that you'll find your customer base there. The problem is obviously it's quite a broad category. If you're only going to go after, say, women 35 to 45, that's a lot of people for you to target. And so it may be too broad for you to get your niche and find your customers more easily. And so your cost of acquisition will probably be higher, but it's still a very useful thing to capture. Now, the second thing that people tend to separate their audiences on is money, lifetime value of customers. And even here, you have an instant problem. So most advertising, most marketing is done on a first conversion basis. So I come to a website, I make a purchase, I convert, I spend £5, you spend £1 on the click, you've made £4 in theory. But that doesn't represent the true behavior of customers, because especially if you are new to me, if you're a new brand and I've not used you before, my purchase is very likely to be smaller. It's very likely that I will go with like a smaller purchase to see your brand, to see if you deliver on time, to see if the quality is good. And once you've earned my trust, I will then become a repeat customer over time. But that conversion between first purchase and loyal customer could take months and years. And so your value from customers is not in that first purchase, it's over the lifetime of them. And so you have a misalignment from day one if you are not aligning your ads to LTV. But LTV also has a problem with it, which is that typically the people who are high value customers are a smaller subset of your overall base of customers. And I'll tell you something that doesn't sound very revolutionary, but a lot of companies forget, which is that typically people who have more money spend more money. Makes a lot of sense, right? But it's true. The LTV in a lot of brands tends to be rich people. And it creates a problem because if you were going to target richer people, people with more money, everybody wants to target these people. And so your cost goes up, your ROAS goes down. And so potentially you put yourself in a different category because then you're then competing with luxury brands, which maybe you are not. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what other commonalities do your audience have other than what they are able to spend? And this is where we come to the third point, which is category information. So sort of their attitude towards the category. Why are they in that category to begin with? Let's say you're a clothing brand. Probably you have, let's just say, 3 sets of customers. Let's say you're Primark. I'm wearing some Primark clothes right now. You've got your subset of people who just don't care at all. They're just going to pick up anything from your shop. Maybe they're only a 1 or 2 time purchase. They just need some clothes in that particular moment, and whatever they find will do. They're not so bothered about how it looks. Then probably your largest category is everyday clothes. They just want something to wear every day. They want it to be relatively robust, but they don't want it to go above a certain price point. And then you've probably got a very small niche, which is fashion people. So people really interested in fashion. They want to get the latest trends, the latest looks, the latest colors, and they're probably an audience that spends a lot more money with you and a lot more engaged. And so they seem to be a very desirable audience. Common question that people have about targeting or segmentation, which is if I target one group, does that mean I alienate everybody else? And I'm going to give a conflicting answer here because I like to give a conflicting answer. So a lot of people would say no to this. They would say that differentiating, difficult word, your offer by targeting and positioning against a particular segment does not mean that you become less relevant to everybody else. But I would disagree. I would say that there's definitely a danger of that. If you are Primark and you specifically start talking about high-end fashion and you start changing your prices and all of this kind of thing, then there's definitely a danger that you could fall on deaf ears. The people who are your everyday customers, they're not so interested in that. You become less relevant to them. And so your lifetime value will actually go down or start ignoring your marketing. And so there's definitely a danger that by specializing towards one group, you begin to alienate the others. So what else could you look at? Well, you could look at engagement and you could come up with some sort of engagement score for your audience. Maybe it's how often they open emails, how often they go to the shop, how often they use their loyalty card um, to spend. And this is the reason why nearly every business is trying to implement some sort of loyalty scheme so that they can have that data of how often you've been there. McDonald's, I can't believe how long it took them to implement that. It seems such a obvious one. They were just doing things by store aggregate levels of sending out coupons and hoping that you purchase them so they could link per building category. But when you've got a loyalty card, you can do that on an individual basis. You can personalize on an individual basis, and it makes a lot more sense. But even with engagement, you have problems because how does that engagement align to the category information? How does that engagement align to what people are actually spending their money on? And so you have another set of questions, which is that engagement based on how good the marketing is or based on how good the product is? And do certain products naturally put themselves to more engagement? So if you are shopping for a car, probably you do more research than if you're shopping for socks. And so if you are more engaged, is that more relevant? It's hard to tell if you are selling a variety of different things. And so ultimately what you want is a mix of these different things. So my rule of thumb typically is that I will segment or target based on category lines. So I will go for, in our example of clothing, the don't care people, the fashion people, and the everyday people. And the reason that I would do that is my sort of yardstick is, would my email be different? Would my communication be different? And I know some marketers out there will say, well, every email should be different and personalized and blah, blah, blah. But I'm saying just in general, if I sent something about London Fashion Week to the everyday people, yes, there'll be a small bunch of people who that would be appropriate for and they'd be interested in that. But moreover, it's probably not as appropriate to those people who are just interested in like what's the latest trends and what's available this season. And then, of course, it's definitely not relevant to the people who just don't care at all. Maybe I don't even need to send those people an email. And so I start with my category information because those people are distinctly different. There's less of them. And so you're not getting too granular with your segmentation. And within those, I would then build cohorts of engagement, obviously, and I would have demographic cohorts within there, so long as that is useful and it makes sense. It doesn't necessarily make sense in every industry, but for fashion, using our example, maybe you would have demographics and then you would have fashion demographics. And so what is interesting to 20-year-old fashion versus 50-year-old fashion would be quite different. And so that messaging would be quite different. It would make sense to have those cohorts, but you wouldn't have a segment of fashion-led people in the 50s and fashion-led people in the 20s. You would have broader categories because that makes your marketing it spend less. And that's the final thing that I want to talk about. So in our example here, we have separated these brands out into 3 distinct people. And then what you want to do is you kind of want to look at them in silo. So you want to look at the CAC, the cost of acquisition of these different groups. You want to look at the LTV of these different groups, and you want to look at the ongoing marketing cost, or OMC, which is a new acronym that I've just invented. And what you might find there is that certain groups just aren't worth it for you to pursue. Maybe you could do some experimentation on those groups. So if you find, for example, that on the face of it, fashion-led people, they spend more money, they're really engaged, these seem to be the audience that you want, but when you think about it, actually the cost of acquisition is quite high. You're in competition with a lot more brands in that particular field. It's not quite aligning with your core messaging. And also your overall marketing costs over time are going to be higher because you need to create a lot of bespoke marketing to these people. You need to go and create more relevant content to these people. And so you might actually find that, well, it doesn't quite make sense to target those people when the bulk of my audience are every day. And that's where I should first put my effort and my budget. But I should still save a little bit for this audience and figure out how I can grow them in a low cost way, in an experimental way. And when I've done my experiments, I can then expand upon that. And interestingly, even though every business is always looking for high LTV customers or people who are highly engaged, you might actually find that the people who are lower engaged, who are just one-off purchases, that their cost is really low, that you're not having to put in as much effort into those people. And so they might actually be a very desirable market depending on what you're selling. So don't rule those people out. But the problem is, straight away, when you've created these free groups, you've tripled your marketing effort instantly. You're suddenly having to write 3 emails versus 1 email. And so you've always got to consider, what are the downstream costs? What are the downstream implications? And it sounds like a simple thing to say, but do you have something to say to these people? Do you have content for these people? Is it going to be distinctly different from everybody else? Because if not, why are you going down this route? Because it has a cost associated with it. And if you don't think about that from day one, then it can really hamper your ideas. And then you find that actually what you do is you don't serve those segments as well, because you've not come up with something new to say to that segment. That segment has been underserved. And the problem with all of these things is that it only represents your customer base today and not necessarily your customer base tomorrow. And so while first party data, I always think, is the first thing to think about and is often overlooked weirdly in today's world, you also have to think about surveys in wider category spend and trends and information, because and try and match those two things. How closely does your demographic match the wider demographic? And you might discover that you've got a niche, and you should spread those niche messages more because you've got a competitive advantage there. And so those are some of the most common problems I see with targeting, which is, I guess, don't target on one particular thing. Create these broader segment category led segments and then have cohorts within them. But remember, with any effort, you have to think, how does it tie back to your strategy? How does it tie back to your marketing resource? And ultimately, are you going to change your product to match these segments? Because if the answer is probably no, then why bother? Hope you've enjoyed that this week, and I hope you will tune in next week. Thanks very much for watching.